Hey everybody. Chapter 1, Section 6, titled Multiplying and Dividing Real Numbers, starts on page 38. First of all, when you are multiplying real numbers, here's your two rules. The product of two numbers with different signs is negative. So if one of them is a positive number and the other one's a negative number, your answer is going to be negative. The product of two numbers with the same sign is positive. So two positive numbers multiplied to be positive, two negative numbers multiplied to be positive. That's what it means by same sign and different sign. First example, 6 times negative 15. 6 times 15 is 90, but they're different signs. The 6 is positive, the 15 is negative, and different signs means a negative answer. So the answer is negative 90. Next example, 12 times 0.2. 12 times 0.2 is 2.4. They are both positive numbers. Since the signs are the same, your answer is positive. Again, that's for multiplication problems. Here's another one. Negative 7/10 times 3/5. Remember, when you multiply fractions, you go straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So if we go straight across the top, negative 7 times 3 is negative 21. 10 times 5, straight across the bottom, is 50. Since that's a fraction, we check to see if we can simplify it, and I don't think you can simplify that one. There's nothing you can take out of a 21 and a 50. Now, you'll notice that I had one part of the problem that was negative, and the other part of it was positive. Negative and a positive, those are different signs, so my answer is negative. Okay? Another example, negative 4 squared. Remember, squared means use that same number two times. So we have negative 4 and negative 4. 4 times 4 is 16. I have two of the same sign, so my answer is positive. Okay. New topic. We talked about square roots in section 3. If you need to go back to that video, you can check it out or go back through your notes. Now we're talking about negative square roots. You get a negative square root if there's a negative sign in front of the radical symbol, in front of the square root symbol. Every positive number actually has two square roots. One of them is a positive answer, the other one is a negative answer. Here's how you can tell. Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Positive 3 times positive 3 is 9. So there's two different ways that I can take the square root of 9. I can take it and I can get a negative 3 or a positive 3 as an answer. If they give you the symbol like this is called plus minus. That means that the problem wants both square roots, the positive one and the negative one. Okay? We'll see that in the next example that we do. Here is just one of the ones that we already know. The square root of 64 is 8 because 64 is 8 times 8 and we just need one of those. There's no sign in front of the square root symbol. There's no sign right here. So that means it wants the positive answer. Okay? In example 2b, it has the plus and minus sign in the problem. Plus and minus, the square root of 16. Well, the square root of 16 is 4. Since there's the plus and minus sign in the problem, there also has to be the plus and minus sign in the answer. Example 2c, negative square root of 121. The square root of 121 is 11. Since there was a negative sign in front of the problem, we need to have a negative sign in front of the answer. Okay? The negative in front of the square root symbol means that it wants the negative part of the answer. One more example of this, example 2d. Plus and minus the square root of 1 over 36. Remember, when you're taking the square root of a fraction, you have to take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So, the square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 36 is 6. So we get 1 over 6. There was the plus and minus sign in the front of the problem, so we need the plus and minus sign in the front of the answer. So this would be the answer to that problem. Okay, those are the rules for multiplication. The rules for division are similar. Remember, quotient means division. So the quotient of two numbers with different signs is negative. The quotient of two numbers with the same sign is positive. So it's the same thing as multiplication. There's also two more rules for when you're doing division. The quotient of 0 and any other number is 0. So for example, 0 divided by 3 is, the answer is 0. If 0 is on top of the fraction, your answer is 0. The last rule for division, the quotient of any number and 0 is called undefined. So, for example, if I have 4 divided by 0, that answer is not 0. You're not allowed to have 0 in the bottom of the fraction. So the answer to this is actually the word undefined. I ran out of room. You can just simplify it UND. Undefined. Okay? For this class, you are not allowed to have 0 on the bottom of the fraction. Okay? You're not allowed to do that math. And the answer is always going to be undefined whenever you see that. Okay? Example of a division problem. Negative 48 divided by 3. If I just do 48 divided by 3, I get 16. But these two have different signs. The 48 is negative, the 3 is positive. Different signs means a negative answer. So that's how I get negative 16. Okay? Now, in the last lesson, we talked about the additive inverse. That's the same thing as opposite. Okay? So the additive inverse of 6 is negative 6. This section, we talk about the multiplicative inverse. If you take a number written as a fraction and flip it over, you get the multiplicative inverse. For example, the multiplicative inverse of negative 4 is negative 1/4. And I'll show you that at the bottom. The multiplicative inverse of 3/4 is 4/3. Okay? You may have heard something like this before, but you didn't call it multiplicative inverse. Reciprocal is the same thing. Take a fraction, flip it over. Reciprocal, multiplicative inverse, those are the same thing. So for that first one up there, negative 4 is really the same thing as negative 4 over 1. I take that fraction and I flip it over, and that's how I get negative 1/4. Okay? We can use this idea of reciprocal, or the idea of multiplicative inverse, to help us with division problems. Instead of dividing by a fraction, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. You're never allowed to divide by fractions, because if you write it out, it can get kind of to be a complicated problem. Okay? 3/4 divided by negative 5/2. Now, this is one way for us to write division. The other way is just to write it with the fraction bar. But if I wrote 3/4 fraction bar negative 5/2, that's really confusing because I've got a fraction on top, a fraction on the bottom, and the whole thing is a fraction. That's really confusing. So we don't do that. Instead of dividing by a fraction, what we do instead is multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. The first number stays the same. The second number flips over. So 3/4, and instead of division, we're going to multiply the reciprocal of the second number. So take the second number and flip it over. Instead of 5 on the top and 2 on the bottom, it's -2/5. Then I remember that the rule for multiplying fractions is straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So 3 times -2 is -6. 4 times 5 is 20. My answer is a fraction, so I have to check and see if I can simplify it. 6 and 20, I can take a 2 out of both of those, and I get -3/10. That would be my final answer. So you're not allowed to divide by a fraction. What you do instead is multiply by the reciprocal. Your practice problems for this section, page 42, numbers 9 through 43 odd.